So I want to introduce Alejandro de Acosta, who is a visiting faculty this year. He's going to be teaching the program, I can't read my notes, Written Artifice in Literature and Philosophy. Thank you. I scribbled this down. He specializes in philosophy, queer studies, and poetics, and he is going to introduce our speaker, Andrew Culp. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Good morning, everybody. I'll be brief. I want to introduce our speaker, Andrew Culp. He is currently visiting assistant professor in rhetoric at Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington. And this is his first time in Olympia. I want to just share with you the titles of three recent. Andrew works in a lot of different areas. This is one area he works in. But some of the titles of his recent publications might give you an idea of the different places his research and thinking goes. So in the journal Angelaki, he's recently published an article called Philosophy, Science, and Virtual Communism. In the journal Communication and Critical Cultural Studies, an article entitled Confronting Connectivity, Feminist Challenges to the Metropolis. And his forthcoming book from the University of Minnesota Press is Dark Deleuze and the Death of This World. Today's talk has had a title change, so you can see here the new title, The Discourse of the Anthropocene. So let's welcome Andrew Culp.
Thank you so much for having me. First, I'd like to thank Evergreen for hosting me, as well as Ruth and Alejandro. And also, you all as an audience, I'm looking forward to your questions, and I've left a pretty substantial period at the end that I hope that you all can ask some really informed questions and have an excellent conversation. And also, before I proceed, I'd like to note that there is some gendered language in the talk that's not my own. It's when I use something like man, it is based in the literature. I'm simply quoting someone else, and if we all want to have a conversation about the problems with that, I think we have to do that in the Q&A as well. So let's begin. The story of the Anthropocene goes something like this. There was a lively discussion about the human effects of the planet at the 2000 conference of the International Geosphere Biosphere Program in Mexico. At the spur of the moment, Nobel Prize-winning atmospheric chemist Paul Crutzen stood up and declared that we are no longer in the Holocene. No, we are in the Anthropocene, he announced. And then he reported everyone was shocked. Now, the immediate implication of his suggestion is rather limited, which is that in the geological timescale that divides up the 400 or the 4.54 billion years of the Earth, we should add a new tiny sliver as a period dedicated to the recent activity of the human anthropos. A short 2 years later, Crutzen drew out the wider implications for this in an article for the journal Nature, in which he argued that humans have become a major environmental force, at least since James Watt's 1784 invention of the steam engine, and that we will remain so for many millennia except in the event of a global catastrophe. I approach this story and the other stories we tell about the Anthropocene as a scholar of rhetoric, who knows that the language we use has consequences for how we think. For this reason, I find the Anthropocene provocative, not because of scientific signatures, but because at its most basic level, the scientific gambit of the Anthropocene is actually a rhetorical one. Why? Because the Anthropocene is about naming as well as the social effects of naming practices. Also the political ones, which is the first title of this talk. So, with the rhetorical focus in mind, it is easy to spot all of the characteristics of our favorite scientific stories and origin stories in the tale we tell about the Anthropocene. Like the apple that fell on Newton's head, Crutzen was struck by a spur-of-the-moment insight. And like Galileo's persecution for promoting a Copernican revolution of thought, everyone was shocked by Crutzen refutation of establishment reason. My purpose here today is not to argue with that story, but instead, my argument is that the discourse of the Anthropocene is a much older and more established discourse than it pretends to be. Furthermore, I'm not arguing against the name Anthropocene, but I do conclude that we need to pursue different discourses as they're related to it. In particular, I think we need to stop saving the world in order to find new ones. I will make my case in two parts. First, I will trace the birth of the human, not the physical one, the intellectual, the knowledge-based one. And second, I will present three alternate endings for the Anthropocene. So let's begin with the birth of the human. To track the story of the Anthropocene, I begin with a rather provocative question. How did humans, the anthropos, become an object of knowledge? Fortunately, French thinker Michel Foucault provides a helpful account of the birth of the human in his 1966 book, The Order of Things in Archaeology of the Human Sciences. Foucault's overall argument is that one thing in any case is certain: man is neither the oldest nor the most constant problem that has been posed for human knowledge. Foucault argues that, at least in Europe, man is not a true object of knowledge until the 18th century. He begins his case with the reading of the Spanish Golden Age artist Diego Vázquez's 1656 painting, Las Meninas. And here I quote, "The painter is standing a little back from his canvas. The skilled hand is suspended in midair, arrested in rapt attention on the painter's gaze. And the gaze, in return, waits upon his arrested gesture. So that between the finer point of the brush and his steely gaze, the scene is about to yield up in its volume." It would be easy to attribute at least a suspicion to Velázquez, whose painter seems to be looking at us in self-awareness. And is not such self-consciousness and self-awareness what defines us and our humanity? But no. Instead, Foucault argues that behind the simple appearance that we are looking at a picture in which the painter is in turn looking at us, in fact, it transforms upon closer inspection into a whole complex network of uncertainties, exchanges, and feints. Which is why the title is actually The Maids of Honor. And through the closer inspection, Foucault spots a mirror at the exact center that serves as a horizon to fix the picture. You'll see that right in the middle of the white, right next to the door. And in that mirror, the subject is presented plainly, transparently, as a sovereign couple. Foucault thus argues that Las Meninas hints at the possibility of the human, but that Velázquez was trapped in the colorless network characteristic of the era, whereby beings manifest themselves and representations are ordered without the cogito. Therefore, it takes something else for our reflective mind to come through in the way in which we, quote, question ourselves today. This something else brings the human into view was actually what Foucault calls an archaeological mutation, in which the humans become simultaneously an object of knowledge and a subject who knows. He says that humanity appears in the 18th century human sciences as they transform into their modern equivalents, with natural history becoming biology, the analysis of wealth becoming economics, and the reflection upon language becoming philology. So returning to Velázquez's painting, he says that the birth of the human demotes the figures in the mirror into merely a chance presence, so that a real subject emerges in the vacant space which the whole painting is directed, us, the viewers, the subject. Like Velázquez's painter, the human sciences thus construct a subject in an irreducible interiority that is exterior to himself, older than his own birth, anticipates him, overhangs him with all their solidity, and transverses him as if he were merely an object of nature, a face doomed to be erased in the course of history. So to translate this, in this way, Foucault argues that there's a resulting finitude, a set of brutal facts that limits our existence as external forces, and it causes the human to appear. This raises the question, does the Anthropocene raise these brutal facts themselves once again, but for our existence in a new way? And what is the image of thought that directs the subsequent inquiry? We'll flash forward to today. We now proudly exclaim the limits of our humanity. There is something that has changed, and it's that we see our finitude not in a painting, but rather in the images broadcast from something more exterior even then. Consider the words of people looking on the Earth from outer space.
I see the clouds, the water, the seas.
I see a beautiful world.
I feel like a part of something big.
It makes me feel small.
We draw our lines, we build fences, but everyone's just sharing that same little ball there.
When you look back at that planet and you realize that it's our planet and it's where all of us live, it's just very hard to feel in any way separate.
I feel very precious that I'm living on Earth.
Everything, the totality of human history has happened right on the surface before your eyes.
I'm just one small piece to a humongous moving part.
It gave me a real pride of planet. It allowed me for that moment to forget about all the difficulties that the people have here on Earth.
It makes you really wonder and think about what are we doing to this planet and how can we better protect it.
It's not just this planet as a ball of blue and green that we need to take care of, but it's everyone and everything that's down there.
We're in all of this together. We're in this planet together.
Like, I don't want anything bad happen to our Mother Earth.
It's our home. I mean, we need to treat it right because we only get one.
In the big picture, we here can make small changes that, multiplied by the billions, can make significant changes in our planet.
Life is lived by small choices. What I do impacts you and vice versa.
Looking at this makes me want to keep it clean and beautiful the way I see it.
I love planet Earth. I love it.
So for some of you, the hashtag Love Earth rhetoric might be a little curious. Thinking back to the space race, wasn't sending someone to the moon and now Mars about colonization, the conquest of new worlds, or simply exploring new frontiers? Such exploration rhetoric is the topic of this month's Wired magazine. Wired writers gave a common refrain to describe the motivation to explore race. Popular writer Michael Hanley ponders, for instance, if you ask me when I think about space, I say this: we have always believed there is, somewhere in our core, a need to push forward, to explore what is over the next horizon. We are curious. We are knowledge seekers. We are tool makers. We are problem solvers. Get off the beach or die. Get off the rock or die. That's what I project into the world, he says. Injecting a note of sobriety, Wired articles editor Adam Rogers offers a contrasting perspective by arguing that the option to bail on our home planet is not an option at all. He directly refutes the argument by saying the argument that the need to explore is somehow built into our souls, by connecting such a motivation to the violences of the pioneer spirit and manifest destiny. Furthermore, quoting Heidi Hammel, astronomer and priority setter for NASA, he further suggests that frontier language is an outdated rhetoric of the 70s and 80s. He then extends his argument by saying that the frontier discourse is just an age-old excuse for land grabbing, resource exploitation, and general wastefulness. So where in the world would the story of conservation come from? Well, one place to look is the 1987 book, The Overview Effect by Frank White. In it, White documents what he found as a shift of consciousness when astronauts traveled to outer space. The overview effect is the name he puts to the feeling astronauts get while peering back at their home planet. It is as if escaping the atmosphere allows them to inhabit the position of Velázquez's painter rather than subject viewer. And they see humans from the outside. According to White, the experience of seeing the Earth in overview transforms astronauts' perspectives about the planet and humanity's place in the universe. The effect is that the astronauts are confronted with the reality that, quote, Earth is in space, a tiny, fragile ball of life, hanging in the void, shielded and nourished by a paper-thin atmosphere. I ask you to remember this, because it's going to keep coming up. White says that it inspires a feeling of awe for the planet, profound understanding about the interconnection of all life, and a renewed sense of responsibility for taking care of the environment. No doubt we continue this awe-inspired rhetoric today. Take, for example, a recent address astronauts made to the world leaders attending the UN climate change talks in Paris held last December.
Greetings from the International Space Station. I'm Station Commander Scott Kelly of NASA with my NASA crewmate Kjell Lindgren. It's an honor for us to be with you today. Your actions during this important meeting will send a message to the world on how we regard the future of our home planet.
Less than 550 humans have orbited the Earth. Those of us lucky enough to have done so more than once have not only heard about the negative impact that the industrial age has had on our planet, we've seen it with our own eyes.
The view from space is just breathtaking. And at the same time, we recognize deforestations and wildfires and so on, which are related to climate changes.
Not only do they mention the overview effect, but for instance, they also note that the Earth is precious and fragile. Once again, a repetition of this thread.
From our vantage point, 250 miles above the Earth, we can see how precious the Earth really is.
When you look at our planet from space, it's beautiful, fragile, and there's this little thin layer all the way around, our atmosphere, and that's the only thing that protects us from the really bad vacuum in outer space. This little fragile layer, the atmosphere, is part of our life support system. We need to be really careful with it.
They further describe the overview effect as an awe-inspiring experience that would change the minds of anyone who goes to space, including world leaders.
I think one thing that we all wish, though, is that groups like yours could be holding your meeting today in space, with the beautiful horizon-to-horizon view of our planet as your backdrop. It would be an awe-inspiring distraction for sure, but there would be nothing better for reinforcing the significance of what you're doing there together today.
Suppose I can transfer the experience which I have to you. Then you would go out and see the Earth, and when you have, like say, the spirit and the insight and the attitude of an astronaut, you start to love the Earth. And if you really love something, you don't want to lose it. Our Earth has cancer. I have cancer too.
And of course, the conclusion, which is already written, that you'll be able to predict, is to return harmony to the Earth.
I believe we must do everything we can to minimize the human contribution to climate change and make better choices so that we could live in harmony with nature and with each other.
So what strikes me, as also struck Foucault, is that seeing humanity as an object of knowledge emerges far before the first astronauts. And as a consequence, the notion that we learn to appreciate humanity through looking back at humanity may be an inflated claim. Moreover, I think it's easy to see that the discourse of space exploration is an analogy for the less established discourse of the Anthropocene. My choice is not incidental. There are other candidate events that remind humans of their finitude, such as ozone depletion or the threat posed by nuclear weapons. And the scientist who popularized the term Anthropocene, in fact, even won a Nobel Prize for his work on ozone depletion, and was the atmospheric chemist behind the theory of nuclear winter. What makes space exploration unique to me is the question of the frontier. It's been a mainstay of American mythology from the Wild West to James Cameron's Alien franchise. So to prove that Crutzen's spur-of-the-moment naming of the Anthropocene and that the astronauts' overview effect speak in a voice those who invented far before their motivating event, consider a book published before the United States even launched its first satellite. In 1957, Dutch schoolteacher Kees Beck published the book Cosmic View of the Universe in 40 Jumps, which was based on a classroom activity he performed with his students. In the activity, he starts with a picture of a girl sitting in a chair holding a cat. Each subsequent image zooms out at the power of 10, so we get to the Milky Way, and even the Milky Way becomes a speck. Beck specifies the purpose of this activity, noting that at school we are introduced to many different spheres of existence. They are often not connected with each other, so that we are in danger of collecting a large number of images without realizing that they all join together in one great whole. It is therefore important in our education to find the means of developing a wider and more connected view of the world, and a truly cosmic view of the universe, and our place in it. But the journey isn't done, as images also zoom in at the same rate until we reach the nucleus of a sodium atom. Beck then concludes his book by outlining that he wants to draw from something very specific from the experiment, arguing that the problem, however, is that primitive man at first tends to use the power in his hands for himself, instead of spending his energy and life for good, and for the good of whole humanity growing as a human family, which has to live together in the limited space of our planet. It therefore is a matter of life and death for the whole of mankind that we learn to live together, caring for each other regardless of birth or upbringing, no difference of nationality, race, creed, or conviction, age, or sex may weaken our effort as human beings to live and work for the good of all. The brilliance of Beck's exercise is that perspective, and what he's providing is ultimately perspective, includes both a stunning visual representation of scale and an accompanying discourse. His book writes the narratives integral to the new space race, which had just begun more or less at the exact same time. And through his cosmic view, Beck joins together the images to form a cosmic perspective of shared humanity, common good, environmental stewardship, but also noting that there's an awe-inspiring experience that must happen in understanding the frailty of life. Such a perspective for him is the result of humans understanding enough of the universe to find their place in it. Cosmic View went on to inspire a number of educational films and further connect a cosmic perspective to a discourse on humanity. So consider the National Film Board of Canada's Cosmic Zoom in 1968. Or perhaps the more popular Charles and Ray Ames' Powers of 10, first their rough cut in 1968, and their 1977 version that was released through IBM and premiered in the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., which was then replaced in 1996 by a remake called Cosmic Voyage.
The picnic near the lakeside in Chicago is the start of a lazy afternoon, early one October. We begin with a scene 1 meter wide, which we view from just 1 meter away. Now, every 10 seconds, we will look from 10 times farther away, and our field of view will be 10 times wider. This square is 10 meters wide, and in 10 seconds, the next square will be 10 times as wide. Our picture will center on the picnickers, even after they've been lost to sight. 100 meters wide. The distance a man can run in 10 seconds. Cars crowd the highway. Powerboats lie at their docks. The colorful bleachers are Soldiers Field. This square is 1 kilometer wide, 1,000 meters. The distance a racing car can travel in 10 seconds. We see the great city on the lake shore. 10 to the 4th meters, 10 kilometers. The distance a supersonic airplane can travel in 10 seconds. We see first the rounded end of Lake Michigan, then the whole Great Lake. 10 to the 5th meters, the distance an orbiting satellite covers in 10 seconds. Long parades of clouds, the day's weather in the Middle West. 10 to the 6th, a 1 with 6 zeros, 1 million meters. Soon the Earth will show as a solid sphere. We are able to see the whole Earth now, just over a minute along the journey. The Earth diminishes into the distance, but those background stars are so much farther away that they do not yet appear to move. A line extends at the true speed of light. In 1 second, it half crosses the tilted orbit of the moon. Now we mark a small part of the path in which the Earth moves about the sun. Now the orbital paths of the neighbor planets, Venus and Mars, then Mercury. Entering our field of view is the glowing center of our solar system, the sun, followed by the massive outer planets, swinging wide in their big orbits. That odd orbit belongs to Pluto. A fringe of a myriad comets too faint to see completes the solar system. Ten to the 14th. As the solar system shrinks to one bright point in the distance, our sun is plainly now only one among the stars. Looking back from here, we note 4 southern constellations, still much as they appear from the far side of the Earth. This squares 10 to the 16th meters, 1 light year, not yet out to the next star. Our last 10-second step took us 10 light years further. The next will be 100. Our perspective changes so much in each step now that even the background stars will appear to converge. At last, we pass the bright star Arcturus and some stars of the Dipper. Normal but quite unfamiliar stars and clouds of gas surround us as we traverse the Milky Way galaxy. Giant steps carry us into the outskirts of the galaxy. And as we pull away, we begin to see the great flat spiral facing us. The time and path we chose to leave Chicago has brought us out of the galaxy along a course nearly perpendicular to its disk. The 2 little satellite galaxies of our own are the clouds of Magellan. 10 to the 22nd power, 1 million light years. Groups of galaxies bring a new level of structure to the scene. Glowing points are no longer single stars, but whole galaxies of stars seen as one. We pass the big Virgo cluster of galaxies among many others, 100 million light years out. As we approach the limit of our vision, we pause to start back home. This lonely scene, the galaxies like dust, is what most of space looks like. This emptiness is normal. The richness of our own neighborhood is the exception. The trip back to the picnic on the lakefront will be a sped-up version, reducing the distance to the Earth's surface by 1 power of 10 every 2 seconds. In each 2 seconds, we'll appear to cover 90% of the remaining distance back to Earth. Notice the alternation between great activity and relative inactivity, a rhythm that will continue all the way into our next goal, a proton in the nucleus of a carbon atom beneath the skin on the hand of the sleeping man at the picnic. Ten to the 9th meters, 10 to the 8th, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are back at our starting point. We slow up at 1 meter, 10 to the 0 power. Now we reduce the distance to our final destination by 90% every 10 seconds, each step much smaller than the one before. At 10 to the minus 2, 1/100th of a meter, 1 centimeter, we approach the surface of the hand. In a few seconds, we'll be entering the skin, crossing layer after layer from the outermost dead cells into a tiny blood vessel within. Skin layers vanish in turn. An outer layer of cells, felty collagen. The capillary containing red blood cells and a roughly lymphocyte. We enter the white cell. Among its vital organelles, the porous wall of the cell nucleus appears. The nucleus within holds the heredity of the man in the coiled coils of DNA. As we close in, we come to the double helix itself, A molecule like a long twisted ladder whose rungs of paired bases spell out twice, in an alphabet of 4 letters, the words of the powerful genetic message. At the atomic scale, the interplay of form and motion becomes more visible. We focus on one commonplace group of 3 hydrogen atoms bonded by electrical forces to a carbon atom. 4 electrons make up the outer shell of the carbon itself. They appear in quantum motion as a swarm of shimmering points. At 10 to the minus 10 meters, 1 angstrom, we find ourselves right among those outer electrons. Now we come upon the 2 inner electrons held in a tighter swarm. As we draw toward the atom's attracting center, we enter upon a vast inner space. At last, the carbon nucleus, so massive and so small. This carbon nucleus is made up of 6 protons and 6 neutrons. We are in the domain of universal modules. There are protons and neutrons in every nucleus, electrons in every atom, atoms bonded into every molecule out to the farthest galaxy. As a single proton fills our scene, we reach the edge of present understanding. Are these some quarks in intense interaction? Our journey has taken us through 40 powers of 10. If now the field is 1 unit, then when we saw many clusters of galaxies together, it was 10 to the 40th, or 1 and 40 zeros.
So after viewing this, it's quite visually stunning. But it's unlikely that any of us had the sort of consciousness awakening that's described in the overview effect, even if there's maybe a slight psychedelic effect or something. And I think that you're not meant to anymore, and you're not going to, and this is where I get to my argument. Since Beck's book, the cinematic techniques of cosmic zoom have actually become a mainstay of mainstream and Hollywood cinema. In fact, the same year that Beck's book was published, Orson Welles finished his classic noir Touch of Evil, which begins with a breathtaking, wide, sweeping tracking shot, considered to be one of the greatest long shots in film history. Yet his shot does not create a sense of shared humanity, it's just criminal intrigue. Other cosmic shots have been populating film ever since. There's the famous Jaws shot, which uses a simultaneous zoom and dolly to give a sense of disorienting background change. Overviews also turn clinical. In one sense, it surveys the scene of a murder, and another, it provides the summary of dehumanizing carnage meant to titilize the viewer. Sometimes it gives montages a sense of depth and to impress the audience with the enormous scale of the production. It coordinates the actors, the song, and the technical work. Alternatively, the zoom's depth also allows characters to boast about their hard work. It's the amount of research they're willing to complete to see an investigation through. No matter how much bureaucratic busy work is required, institutional barriers overcome, or the massive scale of their obstacles. This is a slow shot of the Library of Congress. As the scale increases, zoom also allows us to look back at human creations with a sense of majesty. For instance, the UN building as it towers over a fountain replica of the Earth. Or maybe the scale is just disorienting, as we lose a sense of grounding and feel disconnected from terra firma. So if one thing is true from these examples, it's that the overview is not coded to always inspire a common sense of shared humanity. In fact, I want to suggest an even more provocative argument, that overview is really the perspective of control, power, and dominance. We can see that the power of control uses overviews to eclipse the human subject. In this, the human is eclipsed, or even just plain dead, with grids of buildings, infrastructure, and other looming objects. In these shots, human is not fragile, but frozen. Lifeless collection of experience that seems to have run its course, or better yet, served its function as cogs in a bigger machine, to be ultimately forgotten. As Hito Sterol has argued, these new shots combine warfare, advertisement, and the conveyor belts. They make the conquest of outer space fun. They persuade us to think like armchair bombardiers, or emotionally invested in the bomb reaching its target. And we cheer at exciting explosions shown in dazzling overview. The message it sends is that space is a giant playground where we just go to blow shit up without consequence. At its most ironic, we also get the black humor of miscalculation and bluster, which tells us that perhaps humanity was a mistake, and that our attempts to steward the earth often mutate into plans to destroy it. Zooming back into the details of human life and the world shows it not as a fragile sphere to protect, but a giant bold target. According to Sterol, the overview is our dominant way of seeing in our age of surveillance. For her, today's cosmic zoom unifies the screen and surveillance, which has enabled the detached, observant gaze to become more inclusive and all-knowing to the point of becoming a massive intrusion. As militaristic as it is pornographic, as intense as extensive, it becomes both micro and macroscopic. As such, the zoom does not just scale back to see all of humanity at once, it also zooms into the detail of our movements, our private messages, and even peers into our homes. Echoing my earlier comments on space exploration, perhaps we should listen to Isle Weissman, who argues that surveillance is based on a vertical perspective. He traces architecture from defensive battlements to the imagined Earth as a flat surface, which exists through a three-dimensional sovereignty that splits and stacks space from ground to sky. Or as Achille Mbembe argues, occupation of the skies therefore acquires a critical importance, since most policing is done from the air. Various other techniques are mobilized to this effect. Sensors aboard unmanned aerial vehicles, aerial reconnaissance jets, early warning Hawkeye planes, assault helicopters, and Earth observation satellites. These all make up the techniques of hologrammatization. So let's bring this all back to the Anthropocene. My argument is that there is no necessary connection between the visual mode of the overview and a specific discourse. In fact, the overview speaks in at least two voices: the voice of frail plenitude and the voice of domination. Moreover, I think it is clear that the discourse of domination is winning. I have shown its pervasive use, particularly overview in modern cinema, as well as the overview in industry and war. My argument is thus: time for consciousness raising is over. We need to explore new discourses of the Anthropocene. So for me, I'm interested in three alternate endings of the Anthropocene that do not exist through the overview effect, but in fact, they are narrated by different mythological figures. Those three figures are Gaia, Prometheus, and Medea. Across many cultures, Earth is often metaphorically described as Mother Earth, the personification of nature and the giver of life. The Greeks personified the celestial mother as Gaia, who gave birth to the earth, the universe, the gods, the titans, and even the giants. In 1965, chemist James Lovelock began formulating a definition of the earth as a self-regulating superorganism, which he called Gaia. The concept was part of his work at the Jet Propulsion Lab in California, in which he was developing methods for detecting life on Mars. As a rhetorician, I am in no position to judge the scientific evidence behind Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis. However, the discourse associated with the Gaia hypothesis is of interest, namely because Lovelock connects it to the overview effect. Consider what Lovelock writes in a more popular paper about Gaia. He says that we are now seeing signs of change in which science becomes holistic again, rediscovers the soul, and even theology. Why? Because, I'm quoting here, looking back to see the earth from space, we see that the splendid white fleck of blue sphere stirred us all so much that it even opens the mind's eye, just as a voyage away from home enlarges the perspective for our love of those who remain here. This is the age-old story about natural harmony, that we're only temporary on a bad path and we just need a course correction. This speaks a much older discourse than even the astronauts. And my contention is that we simply allow it to exist, it leads to power, perhaps even hiding power. So to summarize my views, perhaps unfairly, but I think truly, the discourse of the Gaia hypothesis appears to be grounded in a hopelessly naive spiritualism that thinks that just simple shift in perspective is enough to change the course of history. However, there's a philosopher of science, Isabel Stengers, who's arguing for a refreshingly different take for the image of Gaia. For Stengers, Lovelock went too far in personifying the processes of life as a good, nurturing mother, who owes her health for us to protect. Interestingly, this allows Stengers to further emphasize that Gaia is not threatened by us. This is a large claim, but it's very well substantiated. Even our current human-made sixth great extinction would never be enough to seriously jeopardize what is really life on Earth, at least the microbial level. In fact, Stenger suggests that Gaia asks nothing of us, because she is indifferent to those who are responsible for irritating her. In fact, takes it out on everyone else. For Stengers, then, we are no longer dealing only with a wild and threatening nature, nor with a fragile nature that needs to be protected, and not even a nature to be mercilessly exploited. She instead proposes an image of Gaia, neither earth in the concrete, or to affirm a sense of connection to the world. Rather, Stenger's image of Gaia is not of belonging and a need to return to belonging, but one of intrusion. As a personification of the conditions for life on Earth, this Gaia intrudes on our feelings and minds, but nothing more. And as Gaia intrudes on our lives, she reveals that it is humanity that is fragile and not the Earth. And that our future rests not with scientists, geoengineering projects. This is her claim. It's kind of larger. I'm not going to go through that. But she does not look to scientists, geoengineering, but our ability to realize the anti-capitalist protest cry another world is possible. Now to our story of Prometheus. Prometheus is the Greek titan who created humanity and gave it fire that he stole from Mount Olympus. Moreover, he also taught humanity how to hunt, read, and heal their sick. Yet the most popular story of Prometheus was actually told by Mary Shelley in her 1818 book, Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus. Written as a series of letters dated in the 18th century, the era in which Foucault argues that humanity became both the object and subject of knowledge, Shelley spins her Gothic allegory about modern science. Yet the real question is if Shelley characterizes Frankenstein's monster as one, a mistake, or two, the victim of misunderstanding. Extending the allegory to the Anthropocene, if humanity is simply a mistake, then Frankenstein is a cautionary tale about the excesses of scientific hubris. Consider the conclusion to Crutzen's Nature article on the Anthropocene. He advocates large-scale geoengineering projects to optimize climate. And then there is Lovelock, who began advocating nuclear power as a solution to climate change in 2004. So for many, these suggestions are immediately unpalatable, and Frankenstein provides the means to challenge these proposals. What if Prometheus is good, and that humans have only misunderstood him? There are contemporary philosophers who advocate a Promethean approach to our contemporary problems. They remind us that nothing is sacred because we get to define what is sacred and what is not. And that there is no need to return to the earth we had 5, 50, or 500 years ago. Rather, they challenge us with the question, what can we make of ourselves? The result would be destroying the equilibrium between the made and the given, between what human beings generate through their own resources, both cognitive and practical, and the way that the world is, whether characterized cosmologically, biologically, or historically. To make this practical, consider the project of Paul B. Preciado, self-prescribed Testo Junkie. In his book by the title, Preciado documents his self-experiments with testosterone outside a medical protocol. In transitioning, he does not renaturalize a new gender orientation. It simply becomes a junkie to use testosterone in any way whatever. As such, Preciado's story of transitioning is not about restoring harmony, but of testing what is technologically viable. Testo Junkie thus serves as a perfect allegory for a Promethean transition of the human in the Anthropocene. Finally, Medea. Medea is a Greek sorceress, granddaughter of sun god Helios and wife of hero Jason. In Euripides' play Medea, as well as Pasolini's reshooting of it, Jason abandons Medea, so she avenges her loss by killing Jason's new wife and murders their children. In a refutation of Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis, paleontologist Peter Ward has suggested not a Gaia hypothesis, but a Medea hypothesis. For him, multicellular life are the Earth's children, and that Medea routinely kills them off with microbial mass extinctions. He gives evidence for mass extinctions, such as methane poisoning, oxygen catastrophe, snowball Earth, as well as a number of hydrogen sulfide extinctions. While I'm not a scientist, I think this is a provocative alternative and gives us perhaps a different image of humans' relationship to the world. So perhaps Medea's tragedy is already playing out in the Anthropocene. Writer Roy Scranton has argued that the biggest problem climate change poses isn't about the Department of Defense should plan for resource wars, or how we should put up a seawall to protect Alphabet City, or even if we should evacuate Hoboken. But rather, we're facing a bigger problem, which is philosophical. Understanding that civilization is already dead is what he proposes. Scranton responds with the words of Simone Weil to suggest that we need to gain a fresh orientation to the world, and we can do so when we confront our own mortality. Personally, I find this rings a little too much with the words of the overview effect. For me, I'm interested in a more rigorous charting of death. I theorize these as the three deaths: the death of God, the death of man, and the death of this world. The death of God begins with Nietzsche's observations that religion no longer provides the metaphysical mooring it once did. We think of causation scientifically, our notions of authority rest outside of divine right, and truth is a thing we find in the world. Foucault extends the death of man. He argues that the appearance of the human was not the liberation of an old anxiety, the transition as if it was a transition into luminous consciousness as an age-old concern, or an entry into objectivity of something that has long remained trapped within the beliefs of philosophies. In fact, he says that it was the effect of a change in the fundamental arrangements of knowledge, and as an archaeology of thought easily shows, humanity is an invention of a recent date and perhaps nearing its end. So to query Foucault's claim, we could ask ourselves, has the discourse of the overview effect worked? Has identifying the place of humanity in the universe dispelled our old illusions, demystified our old human divisions, and unified us as a species? To me, the answer is obviously no, as a century-old logic has been deeply ingrained in our visuality and discourse without bringing its intended effects. For me, it's time to consider a new death, the death of this world, Medea's revenge. Here is what I have written on the death in my forthcoming book. Each death denounces a concept as insufficient. It critiques those who still believe it and demands its removal as an object of thought. Runaway climate change, the sixth extinction, and many other impending catastrophes are all essential parts of this world. The death of this world admits the insufficiency of previous attempts to save it and instead poses a revolutionary gamble. Only by destroying this world will we release ourselves of its problems. This does not mean moving to the moon, but we have to give up on all the reasons that we have given for saving this world to keep it as it already is. I could analyze it, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to give Stanley Kubrick the last word on this.